In this video, I'm going to talk about what I did in preparation for planking. So this is after the fairing was done, and so now I'm preparing the hull for planking. So when I faired the back of the transom frame here, I went ahead and sealed, since I sanded on it. I did 2 coats of CPES, and then the planking will go over that, so that's what I'm showing here. And then what I did actually before I did the planking, I started with planking on the bottom, is I actually did my plywood on the transom, and I did a 6mm layer, and then here in a little bit I'll show you I actually and then added another 4mm layer. So this first piece is actually screwed on, as you can see. And then what I did also in preparation then is I did 2 coats of CPS on all these bottom members before planking, and then I also did 2 coats of epoxy encapsulation, which I think this picture is not showing that just yet, but this is actually after at least 1 coat of CPS, I think. So, and this is just showing another angle of that. And so I also did CPS on this surface of that first piece of transom planking or plywood. And this is just showing another picture. I think maybe this is after the second coat of CPS. And then I realized that I needed to cut my limbers, and I really should have done this before I did the CPS. But what I'm doing here with my laser actually is trying to find the lowest point of the boat. Now, I assume the boat was level with the stringers, which actually it's not quite, and at the time I was thinking it was. But so what I did is I tried to find the lowest points of these members to find out, so when the boat is floating, where the water, if there's any water in the bottom of the boat, where it'll actually end up. And so maybe I was getting a little trying to be too smart here. I didn't just randomly put limbers like all across the back and then maybe in the middle somewhere. So I don't know if it's going to work or not. I guess I'll find out once I float the boat. So here I'm just showing limbers, a couple of them that I cut towards the back of the boat, and it's just showing using my router, and I just had a guide piece here on this side and this side, and just use my router. And these limbers maybe aren't deep enough. It's something I've heard people say, but we'll see how it works. So here's the 3 on the back side, or on the side and the back on the other side of the boat. And then I didn't fill my screws in the keel and all the bottom battens before I did my fairing, and I probably should have done that. But here I'm just showing where I'm making a homemade dowel, because the holes in the bottom of the keel are pretty big, and I didn't want to just use wood filler and or epoxy because they were pretty big. So it's actually hard to use epoxy. I found to fill countersunk holes, or any kind of a hole, because it tends to want to bubble on you, and you get a bubble or whatever. It's just hard to get it to fill. Wood filler, like I did here, actually I used Fama wood. That works the best from what I found. But and then up front, especially the 2 countersunk bolts that go through the stem, they're big holes, and these are deep, so I made some big dowels there, and so I used my homemade dowels for, I think, at least a lot of the holes, maybe all of them. The ones towards the back, maybe I might have just used wood filler, but I think I did do dowels. I can't remember for sure now. And here you can see the limbers where I cut these in various places on the battens. And here I'm just showing I filled in all these screw holes for the bottom battens. I did use Fama wood for most of them. You can see right here I actually tried to fill in some of these screw holes with epoxy, and you can see I had a bubble or whatever, and then I just used Fama wood to fill that, and same over here. So for these smaller holes with countersunk screws, I found Fama wood again to work the best. So then after I did all that, I had to apply CPS in those areas, and then I encapsulated with 2 coats of silver tip epoxy. And this, what I'm showing here is actually when I did the fairing, this is the top of the chine, which is actually the bottom of the boat, but top side here since it's flipped. And I had to put in a spacer. This is a thin piece, and you can kind of see how it was feathered after I re-sanded this off, because I went a little too deep in this area, and I had to put two of them. You can see this one here, a little bit of that one, and then up towards the front. This is what those pieces turned out. I think in the last video I showed some of these where I clamped the boards on here, but this is what it looks like after they were faired and sealed. So I've got another example here on the other side where I went a little too far with the fairing, and or this board just was a little low once I did the fairing. But I think I think I faired a little bit too much there. Same thing here. This is another part of the chine where I put in some thinner pieces and then epoxied them in and then sanded it, so it's turned out nice and smooth, just to fill in those little spots. And this is a spot on the shear which I showed in the previous video too, where I clamped this board on, but this is how it turned out. And I didn't use CPS or encapsulated the sides just yet. I didn't do that yet because I wasn't doing the side planking yet at this point. So here's that extra 4mm piece of plywood that I used, and I actually used an Omer stapler here, but I ended up sending that back and getting an Omer brad nailer after this because it jammed up on me, and I did this all in one piece, had epoxy applied and everything, and so I was working against the clock, and that when that thing jams up, you have to take the end off and unjam it, so you're kind of working against the clock. But so I just had problems. I know other people have had no trouble with those Omer composite stapler or stapler that uses composite staples, but for me it just didn't work so well. And then I applied CPS on the back side again of this second piece of plywood on the transom. So I did all this is all the plywood on the transom that I put on, and then I did the final planking, the pretty wood, over this, but I did this first before I did the bottom planking and the side planking. So here this is showing after I've done encapsulating epoxy on the boat, and so it's ready for planking. And here you can see my limbers here, and I've got one here, and I think up here you can kind of see, and then up here a little harder to see. I've got a couple here, so we'll see how those work. Just another picture of that. And then once I was about ready to start planking, I realized that I needed to do some more fairing, unfortunately. And so I used my laser just to help me with the center line of the keel. And so you can see that I actually did some more fairing. I realized just another picture of that. So in the keel, I had to do some more there. And what I was doing here is just a sanity check. I was using my laser set in front of the boat, and I was just checking kind of side to side to make sure that I was fairly consistent with where I ended up. I just did some test points along here to make sure my fairing was reasonably consistent from side to side. I did that in a couple different places. I should have done that obviously before I sealed everything, but then I had some other areas I needed to do a little more fairing that I found, and so I ended up having to do some more. And on this side here up front, and then kind of all along back into this area, so, and even here and here. So sometimes that happens, but then I had to kind of reseal things after this. But I was glad I checked. And so this is the best picture I have after everything was done and resealed and ready to go. So this is basically the whole bottom of the boat now has been sealed with CPES 2 coats and then 2 coats of encapsulating epoxy. So now I'm ready for blanking.